think we are live. So, hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us on another image review live. Do you want to double check that we are live?
I will absolutely do that. Let's see.
I think I just checked and because I was getting an echo on mine. So, we are
I can
definitely
hear that as
live.
well.
Yes, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It looks like we have a bunch of people already joining us for the Image Review Live. I am Juan Pons, and with me is Jaclyn Merica. How you doing, Jaclyn?
Oh, doing very well. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to discuss some really amazing images that have been submitted this month.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people submit images. We have submissions from 13 people. So that's pretty good. We do have last in the last session that we had back in December. It's been kind of busy. January, it was all of January in Yellowstone. I left on January 2nd, returned home on February 5th or something like that. Um, so we didn't get to have one of these. And this year, 2022, just looks incredibly busy. So I'm not so sure that we'll be how many of these we'll be able to have, but we'll do as many as we can. I'm thinking maybe we'll be able to do that once every 2 months. But on our
Hmm.
last session back in December, we talked about, excuse me, demonstrating quickly the new selection tools in Lightroom because those are really game changers. So what I want to do is I want to go through some of these images that you guys sent us. I know a lot of folks sent a bunch of images, so we're not going to be able to go through all of them, but we'll be able to go through at least one image per person, and we'll try to get through those, you know, as fast as we can, while still providing insightful information. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time showing you guys the new selection tools in Lightroom and how I use them because I think these are game changers, making life a lot easier for
Hmm.
creating really, really cool and awesome selections. I mean, it's just incredible how fast you can make these selections and how you can work a lot better and a lot quicker in Lightroom by creating um, or applying selective adjustments to only part of the image. Because before it was kind of a pain to create these selections. Now it's so easy to do in a lot of cases. Not every case, but I do have a bunch of images to show you, to give you examples on how to do that. Anything else you want to add, Jaclyn?
Well, I'm just appreciative to the already very lively live chat that is
Oh yeah,
happening right
I see
now.
that.
If those of you who don't know, you are able to join us and ask any questions live. I will be seeing those and I can relay them to Juan. But yeah, it's just really great to see some new names and some familiar friends. And I'm glad that everyone is here. I'm glad to start talking about these images.
Yeah, I saw that Carol Ann was asking for me to turn the volume up a little bit. I just did that.
Mhm.
So Carol Ann, let us know if that helped a little bit on your end. I know we get a complaint of one of the sessions in the past that things were a little too loud. So I want to make sure that we are not too loud. Um, Okay, so yeah, we have a lot of folks joining us. People that we know that've been with us on trips and been on some of these image review live sessions before. So it's good to see you all here again. Very
Yeah,
very cool.
absolutely.
Okay, so why don't we get started with these right away so that we can start giving some feedback and then we can get to the Lightroom sessions. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the first image here is from Andy Johnson. And Andy, if I remember correctly, you and I were kind of close to each other when we were actually making this image. This was correct me if I'm wrong, but this was at the Out of Acadia conference back in October, was it? I think it was October, right, Jacqueline?
It was October, yep.
Yeah, and this is on the quiet side of Acadia National Park on southwest in the southwest part of the island itself. And this image doesn't look all that exciting here, but if we look at the after image that
Mm.
that Andy was able to bring out, we had an absolutely spectacular sunset on this evening. We went out to shoot the Bass Harbor Lighthouse in the afternoon because that place is getting a little crazy, so we don't get to go there that much in the evenings for sunset anymore because it's just absolutely madhouse. But we actually got to one of my favorite spots to shoot sunset in Acadia, and it's this marsh area on the southwest part of the island itself. And the sky just completely lit up. We had really interesting clouds, really beautiful clouds. Um, and this is one of those examples where you actually do have to do quite a bit of processing to the image because you will have, really bright skies, really bright part of the sky, and a really dark background or foreground. So
Hmm.
you have to bring in that foreground while toning down that background at the same time. And I think Andy did a pretty good job here. I think that for my taste, it's maybe a little bit too saturated. I would want to bring it down a little bit. It's a little bit too bright, and the colors are a little too vibrant, especially these greens over here. So maybe what I would do instead is try to bring some of those colors down a tiny little bit. Um, maybe just by bringing my saturation down a little bit. But these greens are still a little bit too electric for my taste. So I would want to bring
Mm.
those greens down in Lightroom, going down to the HSL slider and bringing those greens down a tiny little bit on the saturation and maybe even on the luminance as well to make those greens a little bit more realistic or more what I saw when I was there. Not so much, super bright and super electric. And I think that the image still holds up really well. We have a beautiful sky. We have some beautiful, color. And one thing I want to mention, a lot of people come to Acadia in the fall for color, right? Because they think everything's going to be lit up or whatnot. Well, the truth is, Acadia, the vast majority of vegetation in Acadia are evergreens. So you don't get the big amount of color that you get in the inland portion of Maine and in New Hampshire and Vermont. Acadia, you do get these pockets of color here and there, but you don't get those incredible big areas of color like you do somewhere else. But we did have a spectacular sunset here. I remember this extremely well, being out there to really enjoy the moment with a bunch of people. What do you think, Jaclyn? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think this is just a very iconic depiction of Maine in the fall. This just transports me to a lot of really tranquil areas in Maine. And I think that as far as just the tone of this image and kind of providing context, I think it captures the landscape very beautifully. I would agree that I think that the greens in the image did appear a bit oversaturated from my screen, and so I do agree bringing down the saturation in the toolbar just a tad. But I think that it's a great image, well framed with that reflection. I think it has nice foreground elements as well as really beautiful capturing and exposure in the sunset. That sunset was beautiful that night. I was really jealous that you were on that side of the island because I was elsewhere in the island. I think you guys really were in optimal position. So I think that's a great capture, and I'm happy that that was done with you guys at the photo conference too.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes when we look at these images, for us it may seem oversaturated, and maybe for Andy
Hmm.
or somebody else, it may not seem that way. It may actually look, different on their screen. And one thing to keep in mind is that
Right.
you want to be, calibrating your monitor so that you do have colors that are consistent across what other people are seeing. So that's something that I do, that you want to be calibrating your monitor, pretty regularly. I calibrate my monitor maybe 4 times a year. Some people say you should do it more often, but I only do it about 4 times a year to make sure that the colors that I'm seeing, that I'm processing, are going to be and are going to look like, colors.
Hmm.
They're going to match colors on other people's computers.
Hmm. Well said.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's take another image, a look at another image here, and this is from Cindy. And
Mm.
Cindy was with us in Acadia as well on our workshop in Acadia, not on the conference itself, right?
Right. She was with us at our Schoodic Peninsula workshop at the end of October.
That's right. So, and this looks like a green frog, and one of the reasons I can tell it's a green frog is because of this big disc on the side of the, just behind the eye. It's one of the telltale
Mm.
signs of actually green frogs, and these guys can be pretty big, and I absolutely love the eyes on green frogs, and she did a little bit of processing on this image here. Let's take a look at to see what she did. She really just brought in a little bit more detail into the image so we could see a little bit more texture on the frog itself and maybe a little bit on the background. And I think,
Mm.
this image is great as it is. I don't think it needs a lot of processing to be done. So I think she did a good job in just bringing out a little bit of that highlight. I love the composition as well. I love the fact that we have more room in front of our subject than behind our subject. That's always really important. Our eye is tack sharp, which again is
Mhm.
another, I don't want to even say it's a rule. It's mandatory with wildlife that our eyes are nice and sharp. You always have to make sure that you focus on those eyes. And I love the reflection of this frog in the water. And I love the fact that we can see so much detail on that eye. We can even see a reflection of the sky, on that eye of that frog.
Mhm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that it is really tack sharp, and she did a great job with her composition. Um, I am almost inclined to prefer more of the dark tone in the water, actually, because I find with the light and the exposure brought up, I'm seeing myself looking at more of the kind of extraneous details on the surface of the water. So that
Mm-hmm.
might either be a task of cloning those out, or perhaps even just vignetting, so that for me, I want my eye to go directly to the frog and the lightest part of the frog, that beautiful kind of highlight that the frog has on the eye and on that wet part of its face. And so I would prefer, I think, to see a bit more of a darker water so that the frog is really standing out.
Yeah, it
And
does
on
bring you right into that eye, and that really bright
it
spot in the
does.
eye kind of really stands out when you have that darker framing around it.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think with the darker tone in the water, it really does highlight how strong and how sharp the frog's eye is. So that would be my recommendation. I actually have a question from the live chat, Juan. Arlene was asking if these frogs are native to Maine.
Well, green frogs are native, in huge parts of the U.S. So not just
Hmm.
Maine. Yeah, absolutely, they're native in Maine, but they're Maine. We used to have them a lot in North Carolina. I know they go down to Florida. I don't know how far west they go, but yeah, these are pretty common frogs across the across the U.S. At least the eastern part of the U.S. I see that somebody also just posted. How do you feel about cloning out the white spot in the water? And sort of this I think what David is talking about, all these little dust particles in the water.
Hmm.
Would you clone those out or would you leave them? You know, and that's a hard one. I would say that yeah, if some of these are kind of distracting, you may
Hmm.
want to clone them. For example, this cluster over here on the left may be good to clone out. Maybe these guys over here on the reflection of the eye may be good to clone out. But I wouldn't
Right,
necessarily clone them all out because then what's going to happen is that the frog is going to look like it's floating in space. You want to
right.
have that little bit of semblance of water where it's at. So I wouldn't necessarily clone them out, but you could certainly clean them up a little bit if you wanted to make the image that much more impactful and clean and easier to look at. Certainly, these guys on the
Absolutely.
left, I did notice that these guys on the left were a little bit distracting, and maybe because that eye is so awesome and it's so,
Hmm.
it's kind of the focal point of the image, maybe clone out some of these white spots around the eye down at the bottom
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
Okay, well, let's take a look at another image. Oh, this one is from David
Mm.
Recht, and it's kind of interesting. I love this image, but I think the most interesting part about this image is not so much the the image itself, I mean, I love the image. I think it's great. Lots of great texture, lots of color, lots of,
Mhm.
graphical elements in the image that makes me want to keep looking at the image, looking at all the details in there with all the texture that's there. But what I
Right.
thought was really cool is the edits that he did. I'm going to go and show you guys the original image. He shot this with a pretty wide angle lens, a 15 to 35. And let's take a look at what he shot it at. He shot at 18 millimeters, so actually pretty wide. So you can tell there's quite a bit of distortion. I'm going to click the reset button here, and this is what the original
Mm.
image looked like. So look at that difference between that and the end result. This is absolutely what a good editing job could do to an image to make an image that much more interesting. The original image here, because you're shooting that wide angle lens, you got all this distortion in the wood, the plant going back on the edge, which it's going to be, even though it's an old barn, this edge is going to be pretty straight, but the wide angle lens gives you that big distortion. But by actually going in and doing, corrections and editing and cropping, and then post processing afterwards, correcting for tone, bringing out some of the colors and some of the detail, adding
Mhm.
sharpness, he has really made a great image of an image that would have been, kind of, not all that exciting compared to this image. So great job at doing the editing. I love the fact that you brought it in right in the center. This is an image where having that corner right in the center really plays and makes the image that much more dynamic, because we have all these slats, all these logs going off in radiance in different directions away from you. So it makes the image incredibly
Mm.
dynamic. And to me, the image is all about the texture and the color and that weather look to the wood. What do you think?
Absolutely. Well, so I really appreciate that David contributed. He said that these are Mormon barns, and he said that he needed to get a unique shot because we know that Mormon barns are often photographed and the way that they are. So I'm really appreciative of him kind of honing in on the details, getting the texture and the tone. It really feels like. It feels very cinematic to me. It feels very like emblematic of like this is going to be the opening shot of a spaghetti western, and the credits are going to like the opening credits are going to show, and then the movie's going to start. So it feels, yeah, very artistic, very cinematic, and great breath work. That texture and the colors that you have on the left side versus the right gives me kind of an indication that perhaps there's sunlight on the right, something like that. It just makes me think a lot about where I am and why the wood looks so different around the corner. So I think that it's a very thoughtful image. I really appreciate that he submitted it. Great edit.
That's a
Great
great
edit.
point. You can tell by looking at this image where the sun is hitting this barn,
Right,
right? It's hitting the left
right,
side. It's all washed out.
exactly.
You get that grayish look to the wood versus that
Right,
rich, brown
right,
colors of the wood on the right hand side. And
exactly.
it's cool that David thought about coming up with a different look to the Mormon barns. I had no idea there were the
Right,
Mormon barns in Wyoming at the Tetons, in the Teton National Park. But
right.
great eye, great look. Good thinking there,
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, David.
Okay, let's take a look at image from Ira. And I think Ira has sent the images before on the Image Review Live. So thank you again for sending images in. And as I look
Yes.
at this image, it's funny because I look at this and this is what I'm surrounded right now. We have about 3 feet of snow outside my door right now. We have gotten pummeled here in Maine with snow. All of it while I was away, or most of it while I was away. So my wife had to do all the snow blowing. I did a lot of it when I got back, but she, she was beside herself with the amount of snow that we got while I was gone in Yellowstone. And we could have used that snow in Yellowstone because we had very little snow in Yellowstone. So I wish,
Hmm.
wish those storms had hit us over there versus here. In any case, as I look at this image, one of the things that as I look at this image is like my eye keeps wandering around. There's not
Mm-hmm.
a focal point to the image for me. There's nothing that kind of grabs me and says, "Look at me. This is what this image is all about." I mean, there's lots of little elements in the image that I like, but it's like there's too many elements, too busy for my liking. I like to have images that are simpler, that are more direct, that are easier for someone to digest, and it grabs someone from, from the get go. So I
Mm-hmm.
would have focused more on maybe, smaller aspects of the scene itself. It could have been the water, it could have been the trees, it could have been some of the patterns in the snow. As the snow falls, it creates these incredibly beautiful patterns. Um, so I would try to focus, think about when you're looking at an image, how can you simplify the image? How can you make it so that it's painfully obvious for your viewer what this image is about, what you're trying to convey, as you make as you're trying to create an image like this. Um, for me, in a scene like this, I would have been looking for some of the detail in the snow, some of the detail in some of the vegetation coming up through the snow and how that snow fell on it. Or I may even be looking at, cropping in on, making this really an abstract image of snow clinging to the trees. So you have this sort of black and white scene of snow on trees itself. So when you
Mm-hmm.
make an image like this, think about, I mean, not just an image like this, every image, as I'm making an image, I'm always thinking is, how can I simplify my scene to make a bigger impact on my viewer? What do you think, Jacqueline?
Absolutely. I think that in practice, I really like what Ira was attempting in this image. I think there's really beautiful contrast between that dark water and that pristine white snow. But I want to kind of zoom in and see more of it.
Mm-hmm.
So either I want to see more breathing room in the shape of that water, the shape that the water takes in the frame, or I want kind of, yeah, more detail shots. So the frost on the riverbank of the water, that dark water can kind of act as the negative space in the image, but then I want to see more kind of context of where we are, because I think that it's a beautiful canvas. Basically, this landscape is beautiful, and I want to see more. It's kind of begging the question to just kind of zoom in and show me more details and get a more intimate look. I see, yeah, exactly. That kind of framing is what I was envisioning as well, with kind of the negative space of the water taking up a portion of the framing, and then having some really nice detail in the frosty trees.
Right. I mean, it's zooming in and getting in close into that detail. That's really what makes this image. All the
Right,
textures, all the color, all the contrast that's in there, and the water.
right.
Obviously, all I did here was crop out a big part of the image. But right now we have some vegetation in the foreground that's kind of impeding our view on the water. But getting a little bit closer, being able to see that water and contrast that water with the snow, I think would have made the image that much more impactful. And again, simplifying it as
Hmm.
well, right? We're
Right.
really just simplified the image here by focusing in on some of the elements that are most important.
Right, absolutely. I think that the elements are so dynamic that it could get overwhelming, kind of in the crop that it is now. And I think that that kind of more zoomed in crop on the details is definitely stronger. And also, Robin had said that she would love to see Ira's color image. And so if that is something that Ira wants to submit, I would definitely be interested to see the color image. I thought that perhaps this was just really monochromatic from the landscape. I didn't actually
Mm-hmm.
understand that it was black and white. So that's also
Yeah, I mean,
interesting
it
too.
does
I'd
look
be
like it was a
keen to see it.
converted to black and white because an image like
Uh-huh.
this will typically have a lot of blues to it based on the
Mm-hmm.
light because it's overcast. In
Right.
the winter, you have lots of blue, so it was converted to black and white. So I actually like the black and white, but I wanna again just focus in on what's most important in the image. What focus your viewer's eye on that which you're trying to convey, um,
Mm-hmm.
and simplify the image. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so let's look
Absolutely.
at another image here from Giovanna Hopkins. And this looks like White Sands National Monument down in New Mexico. And I've been there before. Lots of people walking around, creating all sorts of tracks, which kind of sometimes make it difficult to make great images when you're out there. Um, what's interesting is the approach that she took to editing this image. So let's look at her end result of that image. And, and it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, so to speak, but I do like what she tried to accomplish here. To
Mm-hmm.
me, this looks like a very surreal type image with the the two tones in the image. You have a gold and a blue into it, making
Right.
a kind of bicolor type image, which is a something that we used to do a lot. I used to do that quite a bit when I was shooting in black and white film in the film days. And there's nothing preventing us from doing that today. And digital is actually a lot easier to do it
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. And to me, I love the image in this sort of extreme treatment that she gave it to it, because the light in this particular scene looks really soft. Um, Whereas here, the light looks a lot more dramatic, and gives it that feeling of, I don't know, like it's a out of this world type image. It makes me
Mm-hmm.
think of, I don't know. I have read a number of times, when I was little, and then later on, a novel by Ray Bradbury called Martian Chronicles, and that for some reason this just reminds me of Martian Chronicles.
Hmm.
It looks like a Martian scene with Martians walking around on these dunes. So it makes it really look out of this world, and makes an image that may have not necessarily been all that exciting to something that is really impactful. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the edit that's applied is very otherworldly. And it's just something that you had just mentioned now as well. And people in the comments too are saying the surreal color is impactful. Yeah, I think that without this very drastic edit, and kind of the mirroring that texture that you have from the sand in the foreground, and then that sky as well that has a lot of detail. I think that is working very well together, almost kind of mirroring one another. And then the mountains that have this dark color cutting through the middle of the image. I think it really works as an edit. I think it's a very good approach to something that might not be um, necessarily seen as like realistic, but it's very creative in its approach. And I love that too. I love the color contrast that you have with those blues and those oranges too. So I really love this image.
Yeah, it's interesting that someone was asking in there whether there are
Mm.
how this was done. Was it done, by dodging and burning, or just adding color? And someone else asked, it reminds him of an infrared shot. And initially I thought maybe it was an infrared shot, but looking at the original image, um, an infrared shot doesn't
Mm-mm.
you typically look like this. You have
Yeah.
infrared shots. At least the infrared images that I've shot with digital end up being more reddish than bluish, like they have here. So it's kind of interesting because Lightroom used to have a feature to allow you to do this, to add different colors and different tones to different parts of the image. And the way that Lightroom used to do it is that you would add a different tone, sorry, to the highlights versus the shadows of an image. So typically, what you would do is, to create an image like this, you would add a gold tone to the highlights and a bluish tone to the shadows, to give you
Mm-hmm.
this sort of chromatic effect to the image themselves.
Yeah.
Again, we used to do this with all sorts of chemicals in digital darkroom when we were shooting black and white, but now it's a lot easier with color with Lightroom, because you can actually experiment. Um, in the latest versions of Lightroom, they actually took that panel away, so that panel is not there anymore. You can still accomplish it, but it's not by default that the panel to create these bicolor images are not there. It's not there anymore. So it's a little more
Hmm.
difficult to do it than it used to be.
One last note as well, Juan, is just that would you mind going to the unedited file? I'm looking at the sky and I'm just kind of amazed at like the texture and clarity that is captured in the edit, and it almost to me is like seems like the sky replacement tool in Photoshop was used, because there's so many textures that I'm not seeing in the raw version, which I just also think is really indicative of a good edit. If if was it Giovanna was able to pull this out in her edit too. I think that's very cool. That's
Yeah,
just
and
another
I
thing
don't
I'm
think that this guy was
appreciating.
replaced because I do see some of the
Yeah,
same patterns in there.
right,
But it's amazing sometimes the latent patterns that exist in skies that you can
right,
bring out in Lightroom afterwards by just one of the
absolutely.
best tools that I think of to bring out some of those latent textures in the sky is to use the clarity tool or
Hmm.
the dehaze tool. But the dehaze you got to use very, very, very judiciously because it can really, you know, create really weird looking images. But yeah, using the clarity tool in the sky can actually bring in an immense amount of detail that you can't really
Right.
see initially.
I feel like that's perhaps what has been applied. But
Yeah.
if Giovanna, if you're listening, we'd love to hear in the comments what the edit is that you applied to the sky. It's great.
Okay, so we're gonna try to move a little quicker because we're at
Okay.
half an hour past and we haven't gone through, half of the images yet. So let's try to
Whew.
move a little bit quicker here so we can spend a little time giving you guys a quick demo of some of the options that we have in selections with the new Lightroom.
Hmm.
So anyway, so this is Ken Erickson. He actually was with me down in Bosque de la Pache on a workshop back in December, early December. And these are sandhill cranes kind of fighting, or you could say fighting or court dancing or courting or whatnot, but really interesting behavior, really cool behavior. And I remember seeing this, and the challenge was how busy the scene was. You had this other sandhill crane behind, and you got the ducks in the foreground. These are pintail ducks, which are actually beautiful ducks. I don't mind those as much, but especially this sandhill crane behind was kind of difficult. And I want to show you guys now the edit that Ken did. He really zoomed in on the image, brought in a
Mm.
lot more detail, and cloned out that sandhill crane. And you just look at that. Look at that cloning job that he actually went through to do that. Um, pretty good job, pretty remarkable job, and really zooming in on our subjects kind of tells us a little bit more of a story. It does look like these two guys are fighting in midair, while this third sandhill crane is kind of running for its life. And and all the pintail ducks and the mallard over here are kind of oblivious to everything that's going on. I like this shot. I think he did a great job. My only nitpick that I have is that it does look like maybe it's a little bit too bright. That these sandhill cranes are a little bit too bright in the scene. I would want to bring down that brightness down a little bit. And again, that may be a function of monitor calibration. In that, in my monitor, his monitor may be darker than mine, and that's why it looks so bright compared to his. I would bring down the exposure maybe 2/3 of a stop lower.
Mm.
What do you think?
Mm. Yeah, I'm agreeing with a lot of the comments that we're getting. Impressive cloning, Lee said. I couldn't agree more. I think that yeah, that's great and great edit to see the potential in this file and go through the painstaking detail of cloning it out. Perhaps you're using the more recent version of Lightroom that Juan's going to show us. Maybe it was a breeze to clone that out, but yeah, I think that it's great action shot. I appreciate the cropping as well. I think that it's much easier to focus your eye with that more deliberate crop. Um, and yeah, I really appreciate it, Ken. I think that this is an awesome start, and I appreciate the other photos that you submitted from Bosque. So it's great to
Yeah,
see.
the one thing to keep in mind, Ken, when you look at this, if you look at the cheeks of these guys, those whites are a little bit
Mhm.
too hot, a little bit blown out. We're losing detail in there. You don't want to be losing that detail because your eye gravitates to the brightest part of the scene. In my, our eyes are being drawn to those two cheeks. So,
Mhm.
so when you're editing, when you're adjusting exposure, be on the lookout for that. Make sure that you are not blowing out those whites. But great
Mhm.
job.
Really good.
Okay, next image here is from Lee. And Lee was just with me back in January in Yellowstone on one of my 3 workshops in Yellowstone. We had some great sightings, some great experiences while we're in Yellowstone. Probably one of the best weeks that I've ever had in Yellowstone. And one of the things that we were trying to capture were these frosty bison. And not just any frosty bison. We're always looking for big bull frosty bison. And one morning we had this really amazing, beautiful, huge specimen. But it wasn't moving very much, and it was right next to this big kind of root on the side, which was kind of a little bit challenging. So I want to show you now, guys, the edit that Lee did because I think she did an incredible job in zooming in our subject, cloning out that branch or that root ball that was there, bringing out detail. Look at this eye. We can actually see clearly that eye of our subjects and really bringing out a lot of that frost on the subjects. I mean, I'm getting cold just looking at this image, and I was there, and I know how cold it was, but I'm getting even colder now. So I think you did an amazing job, really good job of bringing out detail on our subject. 2 little nitpicky things that I will add to the image is I think the clone job they did was pretty good, but I think you had some ghosting still here from that root coming in. So I would work on this little part a little bit better, try to get that out, and really blend that in with the background. And then
Mm.
I would like to see a little bit more room on the left hand side. You do certainly have it. If we look at the original image, there's lots of room on the left hand side. So I would add a little bit more room because our subject is kind of looking to the left, right? So we want to have a little bit more room on that side. I want to give ourselves a little bit more breathing room. So I would give myself a
Mhm.
little bit more breathing room on the left hand side just to make the image feel a little bit better. Just as an example, if you were to print this and then you're putting a mat on it, that mat will be taking over about a 1/4 inch on each of the edges. And then this edge would be so uncomfortably close to the back end of our bison. So just consider that, giving yourself a little bit more room on the left hand side. You certainly have it there. And then try a little bit harder to get rid of this little clone ghost that
Mhm.
you have here. But otherwise, I think you did a remarkable job. It's just a beautiful, beautiful specimen.
I agree. I'm really happy to see that Lee had submitted her work from just what a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
back in Yellowstone. So good on you to start going through your images, start doing some edits. Um, I completely agree with you, Juan, that I think that a little bit more breathing room, back on that hind side of the bison would be ideal. I want to see just a little bit more room on that side, and you have ample room, so that should be completely feasible. I love the detail that you have in this edit, really, that it highlights the frost so
I mean,
much.
look
Like
at
you
that.
can,
Look how much
you,
detail there is in there. It's just
it's
incredible.
incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, I feel like you can touch that image and you're gonna just hear the crunch of that frost falling off of the bison's face. I think that the edit, you can see it better than I can in Lightroom, but if there's a bit of some kind of cloning issues, that's very simple as well. And then this is a really stellar image. I have no other feedback for this. I think it's fantastic. So thank you for submitting.
Yeah, one of the things that and people in the workshop we talk about this, and people think I'm kind of being a little bit I don't know, a little picky. Maybe it's the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but there is a difference between snowy bison and frosty bison. And this is one of the things that we talk about. What the difference is between snowy bison and frosty bison. And this is a prime example of what a frosty bison is. because you see the frost, you see each individual hair covered in frost. Whereas a snowy bison is you have snow caked on the bison, so you don't see each individual hair, covered like that. And they're both, beautiful images. Frosty bison versus snowy bison, but they're definitely distinct things. And people kind of
That
make fun of me when I mention that, but anyways, I
that
thought
is
I'd mention that.
definitely it's a distinction that you can only really have after 20 plus years of
Yeah.
dedicated time in Yellowstone in winter. So,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
I guess so. But I teach people, and the people can spot it right away. So
yeah, awesome.
thankfully, that was a great image, and it was lots of fun to having you along on that workshop. So this is Linda Tunick, and I'm assuming this is in Bosque de la Paciosa, but not necessarily. There's lots of places that we have sandhill cranes in water. They love to overwinter in water pools such as this because it keeps them safer from predators. Not 100% safe, but definitely is a lot safer from predators. And I do love the edits that Linda did. So let's look at the edit. She zoomed in on this small flock of sandhill cranes and really brought out the detail and the color on them. I love the reds on the top. I love the golds on the wings on the sides of the I can never say that word, epaulets of the birds. And I do like sort of this little procession of sandhill cranes. One of the things that we talk a lot about on workshops and on some of these image reviews is trying to maintain separation between your subjects, right? Because that's going to give you a better look of your subjects. And although we don't have a lot of separation between these, we can very distinctly see these individual birds one from another.
Hmm.
So having this group of birds, even though there's not a lot of separation, they're all still together, I think works very, very nicely. Um, I love kind of the expression on all of them. They're all looking in different directions, which makes this image that much more powerful versus if you had one or two birds that were or two or three birds, sorry, that were looking in the same direction, looking the same way. I don't think it would have been as compelling as this image. And I love the crop that she did. I like the fact that we have a little bit of the reflection at the bottom. Um, it does feel a little bit centered, but I think it works very nicely because we do have some nice light and some nice reflections on that water at the bottom. We have lots of details. We can see the eyes of the birds. We can see a lot of details in the feathers and the colors. I really like that edit compared to this first
Hmm.
image, which doesn't, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't grab me. There's nothing special about the image, so to speak. The fact that you found this image within that other image really speaks volume as to what you were able to see in that particular situation.
That's very well said. I definitely agree. I also agree with Melody in the comments, who she said that she loves the rich colors of the cranes. I think that's something that's really strong in
Mm-hmm.
this image. The warm tones that you see in the feathers that also then kind of transpire them down into the water. So I think that that's a really beautiful kind of theme throughout this is that warm tone. Um, and yeah, Robin had said nice separation between the water and the cranes. Arlene had said love the crop. I think that the crop is also a really strong crop too. It's great that you found this image in what could potentially be a busy image, and pose some challenges. So thank you so much for submitting this and submitting your original file too. It's really cool to see that and get that insight.
Yeah, I see that she did reply saying that she took this in Arizona. Pretty cool.
Okay, cool, cool.
Okay, so let's look at an image here from Melody. She actually submitted a few images, but she submitted two images of one of my absolute favorite birds. I used to have lots of eastern bluebirds when I lived in North Carolina, and I absolutely love um, eastern bluebirds. Just the colors and how interesting they are. Unfortunately, I don't get that many of them here at my house in Maine. They do come up here in Maine, but we just don't have the numbers that I used to have in North Carolina. And she submitted two eastern bluebird images. And I
Mm,
like both of these, but for these two, I really, really like this one.
Mm.
Because, it gives you a sense of environment, a sense of place. We can see that it's raining. We see these droplets coming down in the background. And by using a somewhat slow shutter speed, it's not even that slow a shutter speed, 500th of a second as I'm looking here.
Oh,
I'm just surprised that these rain droplets are, little streaks at 500th of a second. So that's pretty remarkable. Must have been really
must have been
fast
raining
driving
pretty
rain.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can see this bird. He looks like he's, yeah, wet and miserable and cold, but I think it adds a lot to the scene. Um, Now, one thing that I would love to have seen in this image is, and I haven't seen how much cropping she did, I would like to see a little bit more room in the image itself. And I see why she cropped it the way she did is because you have this little stick here on the right hand side, so you were trying not to have to clone that out. But I
Mm,
think I would have given myself a tiny bit more room, tiny bit more breathing room on the lower part, and then spent the
mm.
time to clone that piece out. And actually Lightroom may even do a pretty good job at cloning that piece out because the background is so. Oops, sorry, my Lightroom is lagging. I'm not sure why it's lagging like that, but let me try that again. Yeah, my Lightroom is really laggy, and I'm not sure why it is.
Now we can see
And
it. Mm.
yeah, and it's almost working. Lightroom is really slow. My God, I don't know what's going on with this. And I would move the source up to this area to try to get rid of that little branch. Okay,
There you
so I
go.
actually did a pretty decent job, and that just gives me a little bit more breathing room on this image than what I had before. Um, but I absolutely love this. The focus point is right on this bird. That beautiful colors and that texture of the feathers, as they're wet, kind of gives me that sense of place without rain in the background. So I absolutely love this image. Good job, Melody.
I agree. I think if I'm remembering correctly, Melody also submitted a beautiful bird image last month on a branch. And I think that something that Melody does very well is frames her subject in their environment. And yeah, I really appreciate seeing the rain, seeing that rain droplet actually on that left part of the frame, like on the branch, I think is
Okay.
really compelling as well. Yeah, I just think that she does a great job at her composition and kind of incorporating the environment into it and making it almost a part of the like a secondary subject as well. And I'm really interested because I know that Melody is going to be, I believe she'll be joining you in Alaska later this year.
I'm not sure.
Am
I
I
don't think so.
mistaken?
No.
Maybe
Yeah, I
not.
think you're mistaken.
Maybe. Hopefully, if it is Melody, I really look forward in seeing some of her work in Alaska too. But if not, maybe she'll now be inclined to go because I just appreciate how you kind of frame these birds in such a um, kind of like they look to me. You had said he looks miserable. I think he looks like kind of victorious. This bird is kind of puffing up and frilling up, and he's like, I don't, the rain doesn't bother me. And so I think it's a nice kind of like tone and commentary to kind of put into your image. So I appreciate it a lot.
Okay, let's keep on moving because we're running out of time. So this one is
Ah,
from Moments by Carol. And this is, this image is really out of my wheelhouse because I don't, I'm a nature and wildlife photographer, but I do appreciate this shot, the moment in which you capture this, with that bat hitting that ball and that ball flying up in the
mm-hmm,
air. Um, it's really interesting, and the fact that converted to black and white really focuses us into the action itself and separates
mm-hmm.
our players from the background. Um, but I find it really hard to talk about this because it's so out of my wheelhouse itself. But I can appreciate the timing of this image.
I really appreciate too the very like something that's so strong and powerful in black and white is that like white that you can get, and having her subject and the ball be just, I perhaps she burned around a little bit, in the stands, for instance, the stands are very kind of monochrome, and your eye goes directly to that bright white and that action. I think that that's a really great edit. So whether she kind of burned around and really focused on the player or whatever the edit was, I think that that was a great decision. And it really just focused you straight on the action, even though there's so much extraneous detail around you. I'm not finding myself being distracted by it.
Yeah, no, I think definitely the conversion to black and white really, you know, distills, the moment to that action that's
Hmm.
there. Really focuses us in. There's not all this color that's distracting us from the scene, and it doesn't hurt that
Hmm.
the batter here is all white, so it really draws our attention into the movement as well.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to also highlight some comments. People are saying that they love the movement of the bat. The black and white edit really distills the action. Um, and the black and white makes it look like an old historic photograph, which makes it very
Yeah.
unique. I agree with all of those comments too. Thank you guys.
Okay, let's see if we can move through these really quickly. And Rajiv was with me also in Yellowstone, and I think actually she was in the same group with Lee, if I remember correctly. Um, and yeah, this was an amazing moment that we had. One morning that was very cold, and we were able to photograph, this bison, with as it was sort of breathing and getting all the steam coming out of its nostrils, and I love the crop that the Rajiv actually did here, because if we look at um, the original image, let's take a look here, the original image real quick. And again, I'm apologies, my Lightroom is kind of very laggy. You can see exactly what he did. This was a bison that was standing out in the field that we were able to photograph against that background. And Rajiv just went in straight to what's really cool and interesting about this image, and focused in and
Hmm.
cropped in on just that head of the bison with the steam coming out of its nose, which I think really creates a completely different image than
Hmm.
the one we were able to capture. So really good job, Rajiv, in seeing that image within the image, and just focusing our eyes in, and like I said before, simplifying the image to draw our
Hmm.
attention into our subject.
Completely. I think that that was a really strong decision to make that crop. The separation between the background and the subject too is just incredible. I
Yeah.
really love this image. Honestly, I think it's like something that I would see in Nat Geo, something really beautiful too that would allow itself for like great graphic design work as well. This use of negative space and such, and the framing is just very strong. So I think that Rajiv should be really proud of himself with this photo.
Yeah, really good job. Really good eye of thinking of just cropping in and focusing in
Yeah,
on what's most important in
very
the subject.
creative too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, so Robin actually submitted here two images that I really appreciate. Is this bald eagle up on looks like a longleaf pine, possibly. Um, and this is the before, and I want to bring into their after shot, which I think is a much stronger image than we saw before. Over here we had this tree that's kind of busy. We have this sort of detritus up at the top, could be the remnants of an old nest, and lots of branches going every which way. But by really zooming in and focusing and bringing in, focusing our eye on our subject, you know, you've accomplished two different things. You simplified the image, as you've heard me say so many times on this session, but also has cleaned up that tree to a large extent. The tree doesn't feel as busy or as encroaching on our subjects as the original one did. Um,
Mhm.
the only thing that I would do to this image is bring a little bit more detail on our eagle. I think you can afford to bring a little bit more light into the face and onto the body of our subject. Um, you don't want to bring it, super bright because we can tell the light is not necessarily hitting the eagle directly. It's hitting kind of this rear end, these back feathers, and the back of one of his talons. But I think you have more room to bring in a little bit more detail, a little bit more color, and a little bit more light onto the subject. And I love, you know, some people would say, well, you got this branch in front of it and it's obscuring your subject and whatnot. But you know what? To me, it gives you a sense of the environment as well. So I don't mind that so much. It kind of shows you that these birds don't always perch beautifully on a single branch, like, or what I kind of refer to a bird on a stick. This is more sort of in the field, realistic, kind of scene that you're encountering, while still providing a sense of place, and also keeping it at least um, a little cleaner by the crop that you were able to do. So I appreciate that a lot. But I would work a little bit on bringing a little bit more detail out on our subject. I think you can afford to do that a little bit more.
I think that's some great insight. I would definitely agree if you can kind of highlight the eagle a bit more within the frame. I really appreciate. So Robin had said that it's a Florida scrub pine, and I really like
Mm.
actually that the pine is part of the image, and that Arlene had said it's nice framing of the bird by the branches that draws the eye. Something actually very cool is that while you were describing bird on a stick, Juan, Melody commented that a few years ago you talked about including the environment and wildlife photos rather than just bird on
Mm-hmm.
stick photos, and that became inspiration for interesting bird portraits. Yeah, I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing, and you shouldn't always try to diverge from not including your environment. I think that this is a really cool indication of where this is, and of where geographically this may have been captured. And I think that that's a strength in a wildlife photo too. So I really appreciate that she kept including the pine, and also she framed it in a way that it was really kind of instrumental in the composition. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because we talked about, including things in the environment, which, always makes stronger image, right? But we just talked
Yeah.
about Rajiv's image before, which kind of separates the subject from the environment. But your subject here is so compelling that it just really draws you in, especially with this, steam coming out of it. So I think
Right.
there's room for both. There's
Mhm.
room for the quote unquote bird on a stick, as well as including a bird in the environment as well. And I'm saying bird on a stick, kind of tongue in cheek. I don't mean that. It may sound like I'm derogatory to birds on a stick, and I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to say that it's good to include the environment in the scene as well, not just
Mhm.
focus in on the birds themselves. So, some birds. I mean, I've seen some incredible quote unquote bird on a stick images that are beautiful and inspirational. But try to also include the environment. I think including the environment
Right.
tells a little bit of a stronger story about your subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I think that something that Juan that you often remind me is, get this safe shot, something that would
Mm-hmm.
be, if you only captured one image of the day that turned out, you got the safe shot, and then you can start to kind of apply creative composition and techniques and such like this. So maybe this was after Robin had taken a few, safe shots, safe classic portraits, and then she started to include her environment a bit more, and it really allowed for a very creative and eye-catching image too. So thank you, Robin. Thanks for the photo.
Okay, let's look at the last image here as we round 9 o'clock. So we'll take a few minutes to talk about selection afterwards, because I don't want to skip out on that, and I guess we'll extend this session a little bit today. But this is Steve Nimzek. Steve has been with me on many trips, and I appreciate him coming on so many trips with me, and I'm looking forward to seeing him. I think later this year, maybe in polar bears. Hopefully that will take place this year. But anyway, so this is kind of interesting. It's a little different image from Steve that I'm used to seeing. And as I look at this image, I'm wondering, is that Steve that's surfing out there? I don't know, maybe. Um, but I actually like the editing job that Steve did here. It's very similar to the image that we saw earlier of White Sands. We had this sort of almost duotone type image, right? With oranges, gold and blues. And he did something very similar here. If I actually hit the reset button on this image, you can see what the original image was like. Again, he's heard me say many, many times about simplifying the image, focus on your subjects, focus on what's important. Here, there's all these other things going on, taking place. You got this guy swimming, paddling over here. These other guys waiting for waves to come into place. That we're kind of, our main subject is kind of getting lost in the scene. But by zooming in and really, focusing in on what's important in this image, distilling the elements of this image to their essence, really you get that feeling of being out there on the surfboard with this guy. You can see all this spray coming out, all this water falling, and the gold color of that sun as it's hitting that spray in the water really makes a really compelling image. And I love the fact that he included also more space on the right than on the left. Because even though the surfboard is kind of still pointing a little bit to the left, because of that spray behind the surfboard, you know what the intention of that surfer is, right? He's turning to our right. So you want to keep a little bit more of that in there. It also gives us that, beautiful shape of this wave as it's crashing in the background. So it's giving us a kind of a good glimpse and a good idea. Again, and another environmental shot. We're seeing the environment. We're seeing how the environment is developing as the wave is cresting and crashing right behind them. So I really appreciate it. Even though, again, this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, I appreciate all the elements that are in this image. The color, the light, the shapes, the spray, the action, and the focus on what's important in the image. I love it. And I love the fact also, the last thing I'm going to say is that, and I'm a sucker for this, and those of you guys have heard me before, I like the more panoramic shots. This looks like a 1x2 shot, meaning it's twice as wide as it is tall, which to me, creates a much more dynamic image. So I absolutely love this image. I think you did really good.
Yeah, Juan, I think you said that beautifully. I think that the curvature, that shape of the wave, the color contrast, the how he's cropped it as well, so he's allowing the subject to move into that kind of negative space within the image. You can assume as the viewer that a few moments after this was taken, the subject has now moved into that right frame. And I think that that's really beautifully captured. And so I appreciate how the deliberate edit kind of allows you to come up with that story as the viewer. I think that was a really strong decision. So thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I see that Steve commented saying that this was out of his wheelhouse as well, but he enjoyed it. He thought it was fun. So that's good. It's always good to get out of your comfort zone. I haven't really shot too many surfers, but I have photographed. I don't know what those things are called. The surfboards with the kites on them. Kite surfing, is that what it's called?
Kite surfing, yeah, or wind
and that was
surfing.
actually
There's
a lot of fun. Yeah, kite surfing. Not wind surfing. Wind surfing is when the sail is attached to the board.
The
This is
sail, yeah.
a kite in the sky, and it's actually really. I mean, I don't think I can do that, but I thought it was really fun. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for all these submissions. I really appreciate it. And it's actually getting. I have seen. We've been doing these. I don't know. This is like the fourth or fifth one that we've done these, Jaclyn. And as time goes on, the images are getting better and better. I'm seeing, a steady progression of better and better images being submitted, which is great. And I appreciate that. Well, so now let's get on real quick to one of the things that we discussed last time, and It's the new selection tools in Lightroom, and how amazing these selection tools are. And I've selected a couple images here to give you guys examples on how these tools work, and how I utilize them to create some pretty sophisticated and easy selections. Um, so this is actually some coastal brown bear cubs in Katmai in Alaska during one of my workshops. So we have one of these workshops coming up. Actually, two of these workshops coming up this year. One in July and one in September. So if you want to go out and shoot some incredibly beautiful bears, cubs, and sows, and adults chasing after salmon, or tiny little bear cubs climbing around their mothers, this is the trip to go. But anyway, so let's say this image is fully processed, but let's say, for example, that I wanted to do some processing on our subjects themselves. In previous versions of Lightroom, we would go in with a brush and do an incredibly painstaking and detailed job in trying to get to select these bears, one by one to that selection, and then trying to get the edges of the hair as much as we can into that selection. Well, these new tools in Lightroom make this so incredibly easy. It's just unreal. So the tools have changed in Lightroom a little bit. The tools that you have up here, the selection tool. Now, we used to have all these different selection tools, like a radial tool, a gradient tool, and then the brush tool. Now they're all under one tool, this little round tool over here that looks like almost like a bullseye. So I'm going to click on that to create a mask. And then underneath this, you'll see that you have a bunch of different options. These are two new options. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but you can see that we have the same options we used to have before, a brush tool. So if I wanted to just brush in a certain part of the image, I can do that, or a gradient tool, or a radial tool. Those are the three tools that used to be at the top of the toolbar up here. And then we have the range tools that we used to have in Lightroom as well, under the brush tool or under the linear gradient or the radial gradient tool. But now they're broken out. You have your color range tool that allows you to select color ranges within the scene, or luminosity range. This is to create luminosity masks. And then the depth range, which is something that's only used, and a lot of people look at that, they think, I can never select that because it's always grayed out. That only works for cameras that can actually measure depth. And the only camera that I've ever used that has a depth measuring capability to it is an iPhone camera. iPhone cameras, I think version 11, 12, and 13, or maybe even 10, have a sonar to it. And they actually have depth information in the camera. So you can select items in a scene based on their depth within the scene. So if I were to load an iPhone picture that I took with my iPhone into Lightroom, this option here would become enabled, and I'd be able to actually select items on the scene based on their depth. But this was taken with my Sony camera, which doesn't have depth perception. But let's say that I want to select these three bears. So we have two new options up here. We have select subject and select sky. So in this case, because we want to select the bears, we're going to do a select subject. So I'm going to click on select subject. And really, that's all I need to do. I just click select subject, and you can see that Lightroom is working on it. It's refining my results. And you're going to see what our mask looks like in just about a second. Look at that. Look how incredible that selection is. Look at the hair. Look at the edges. This is not something that you would have been able to do very effectively in Lightroom before. It would have taken years of masking in Lightroom to get a mask this incredibly detailed. And now, because I've selected that selection, if I wanted to make those bears a little brighter, wanted to adjust my exposure, I could do that. if I wanted to, and it's just selecting the, just amazing that just one click, Lightroom knows enough to select those bears. Now, so I have my bears in here, and they're selected, and I'm like, well, I want to select the background. I don't necessarily want to select the bears. What about, do I have a tools to select the background, right? Up here in the selection tool, I did not have an option for background. I had an option for subject, and I had an option for sky. But if I wanted to, I could go in and tell Lightroom, you know what? I want you to give me the opposite of what you've selected. So I selected the subject, and I can go in here to this little panel that comes up that shows you the different masks and the different layers, if you will, of the mask. And I have right here these little ellipses or 3 dots. I can click on this and do invert. And if I do that, it's going to do what you think it's going to do. It's going to select everything but our subjects, right? So it's inverted that selection tool. So let's say that in this case, I want to select the grasses because I wanted to do some manipulation to the grasses. Well, when I did that invert, it basically selected everything but the bears. Now I need to get rid of the selection on the foreground here, on these rocks. Well, that's easy. I can just hit the subtract button, and it gives me another selection that I can do. So I can subtract whatever I want from the scene. I can use a linear gradient to subtract. I can use another subject if I wanted to subtract from the subject, or even if I wanted to subtract from the sky. In this case, I'm going to do a brush tool, and I'm going to go in and paint in this on these rocks and remove the selection of those rocks. So very quickly, I was able to, by using this new selection tool, I was able to select not just my subjects, but I was able to select the background as well. And I can create multiple masks. Over here, this mask 1, I can go in here and do rename, and I can say grasses, and I'm going to do select subject mask. So now I'm going to create a new mask here that's just going to be for my bears, and I can rename this mask. Bear cubs. Clicking on them, I can click on the grasses to select my grasses, or I can click on the bear cubs to select the bear cubs, and edit those independently of each other. That's how incredibly powerful the new selection tool is in Lightroom. It's like black magic. It just works incredibly well.
Juan, we have 2 really great questions, I think. So first is from Steve. He's saying that he's seen that the selection tool, sometimes it does a bit more, meaning that perhaps it picks up more of the scene than what you're looking at. For instance, I was looking at between the center cub and the left cub, right by that left cub's ears, it might have picked up right there. I'm assuming that you're able to go in and like deselect that, basically, just like any other version of Lightroom and Photoshop. You're able to kind of select out that with a smaller pointer.
So very easy.
Okay.
So right now I have my bear cubs, selection selected. I can then go in here and hit subtract and do brush, for example. Make a
exactly.
Brush,
make the brush small
and adjust this section and erase that out, because you're right, that did pull in a little bit more than it needed to. So I can go in and erase that. So I can adjust and tweak those selections.
Great.
Pretty easy.
Another thing, something I'm curious what your opinion is. Mark had said that when you are trying to create that inverted mask, would you duplicate the first mask, for instance, the mask that's selected for the subjects, and then duplicate that and invert the duplicate? How would you go about that?
So that's essentially what I did, except I just created 2 masks by doing subject selection. So What he was saying is I could have taken my first one, duplicated it, and then inverted the second mask, and you would end up basically with the same result that I
Mm-hmm.
just ended up here. Now, the advantage to that would have been that if I did, for example, this Bear Cup selection mask, then I went in and edited, cleaned this area out. Then I
Mm-hmm.
would duplicate it and then invert it. That way, this area, I wouldn't have to clean up this area twice in both masks.
Right.
So that would be the advantage of doing that. But it works either way. I think it's, 6 of one, half of those are how you approach it. Let's
Right.
take a quick look here at another image, real quick. So, actually, let's look at this one, because this one's interesting. This is Caterpillar Arch in Utah. And, I thought, this would be an interesting case to see how selection works for sky. Usually when you're doing these kind of, late night astro images, you want to select the sky so that you can you can apply different edits to the sky. You can try to bring out, see the Milky Way is right here. It's hardly, it's hard to see because it's still pretty early in the evening. But let's say that I wanted to tweak the sky a little bit on this. I can go into the selection tool, do select sky, and you'll be amazed as to how good Lightroom is in selecting the sky, even in an image like this. Not only did it select the sky, but it selected the sky inside the arch. It wasn't perfect. You can see this area here needs a little bit of tweaking because you had the little bit of a branch there, but it was able to select the sky up here as well as inside the arch as well. Again, just an incredible tool that allows you to very quickly create, very, very cool
Right.
selections.
And
Um,
so instantaneous compared to older versions as well, where you would have spent, I feel like, 6 hours just making sure that those little selections around the rock formations were exactly selected to what the
yes.
lines were that you were trying to mask. So that was incredible that that was instantaneous, and you can spend another 5 minutes just ensuring that the edges are all cleaned up too.
Here's another example. This is one example where the selection tools are not going to work all that well, where they're going to fail, right? And it's because we have this bighorn ram and we have this sagebrush in front of it. So, I was kind of curious to see what Lightroom would do when it did a subject selection of that. How much of that sagebrush would it pick up? So let's try that. I'm going to do select subject. Just give it a second and see what it did. It selected the subject, but it also selected that shrub that's in front of it. So in a situation like this is going to be much harder to be able to select just the subject itself because you have something in front of it encroaching onto that subject. So this is, this tool is not infallible. It does have its limitations, but I think overall it does an incredibly good job. It makes our lives
Hmm.
a lot easier. Again, the trick, remember, is that you're not limited, especially with the subject mask, is that you can always create an inverse mask of that subject. So if you want to select something else in addition, besides your main subject in the scene. And the same thing with the sky. In a situation like, for example, let's look at this lighthouse here. I haven't done this yet in Lightroom, but let's see what this lighthouse does.
We
If
know
I
that
can,
lighthouse.
yeah, you were
Yeah.
there with me when I took this
Yes,
shot.
I was.
So I'm going to click select sky, and let's see what Lightroom does in a situation like this. And look at that. It knew to select the sky and not the water below it. So in a situation like this where you wanted to select, for example, the lighthouse and the rocks in the foreground, I would create a selection like this with the sky, then go into the ellipsis here, do an invert, and then I would do a subtract with a linear gradient to remove, to remove the water in the bottom.
Cool.
Or actually, I should have done this the reverse. Sorry, I meant to do it this way. So now I was able to create a selection of just the lighthouse and the foreground, super simple. Whereas before I would have had to spend, maybe an hour in creating a selection that just went around the contours
Right.
of the lighthouse and the vegetation in order to create that. So think in those
Absolutely.
terms too, is how can you use the two smart selection tools to then create the selection that you want by creating inverse mask and then um,
Mm.
editing the mask to remove the elements that you didn't want in there. Okay, well, I promised that this would be short. It's been 20 something minutes already, so I think we're 20 minutes over our allotted time of 1 hour. So anything else that we should mention, Jaclyn, that I haven't mentioned?
I mean, thank you for that tutorial. That was really helpful, even for me. So I hope that everyone else really appreciated that too and learned something from that with that new edit. I do want to mention you had expressed that we have a Katmai trip coming up in the next few
Mm-hmm.
months. We actually have two new spots that have opened for that trip.
Oh,
So
that's
if
right. Yes.
anyone
Yep.
yeah, so if anyone is interested and is wanting to come journey with us to Katmai National Park on July 5th to the 14th of this year, there are two new opportunities for you to join us. There's also just a few new spots left, a few more spots left for the North Carolina workshop. That is at the end of May. That's May 23rd to the 27th, and that is in southwestern North Carolina. And we'll be doing landscape and waterfall photography. It'll be really amazing, a great time. And both Juan and I will be on that. And then lastly, we just opened up two new workshops for the end of the year, December, Costa Rica. So you can head to
Mm-hmm.
Juan's website and see those dates and details for Costa Rica. But we had a lot of people interested, so we chose to expand for 2 more weeks this year.
Yeah, no, that I'm excited for all of those. I think Katmai is going to be amazing. Like I said, we
Amazing.
have two openings in the July trip. The September trip is sold out, and July trip is
September
is
is.
cool because it's a lot of um, uh, uh, cubs, tiny, tiny little cubs that tend to crawl over their mothers and whatnot. So it's a lot of fun to photograph those. The September trip is more bears, chasing salmon in the rivers, but the July one is just the cutest tiny little bear cubs. So if you're interested in that, check out the website and thank
Definitely.
you for mentioning that, Jaclyn. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some amazing photos there that you can take a look at some of the photo opportunities for July with those little baby cubs. And I also want to say thank you to everyone who are expressing such kind
Yes,
words in our live chat too. Thank you to everyone for joining, for your continued support. We really appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, folks, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Keep a lookout for an announcement for the next session. We don't have the date yet, but we will post it soon. Take care,
There we
folks.
go. Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye bye.